Welcome back to the Homefront Live. I am your host today, Reed Galen. It is almost noon in the East and almost 9 in the West. Today, I am joined by the one and only Charlie Sykes. Charlie, welcome.
Hey, happy Monday.
As happy as it can be these days. So, Charlie, the reason I asked you to be on today was the concept of what comes next. Now, I know that it may seem like, well, we are living a fever dream, and the idea that the Trumpocene era may one day end 3.5 years from now, at least the direct Trumpocene era, seems almost too far away. But now you see things like Elon Musk and Mark Cuban talking about third parties. And so my question for you today is, where do the NeverTrump folks going back to 2015 and 2016 go when this time finally ends?
Okay, so first of all, thanks for inviting me. I'm probably the worst person you could have invited to ask that particular question. I have kind of a dark view. I put out my newsletter a few minutes ago, and honestly, reflecting on the fact that back in 2015, there were a lot of never-Trumpers in the House and in the United States Senate. You could actually identify that as part of the Republican Party. One of my takeaways from the big, beautiful bill is to recognize that never-Trump as part of the Republican Party just simply no longer exists. It is extinct. And I say this as somebody who does own a mirror, but there are no Jeff Flakes, Mitt Romneys, John McCain's. There are no more Liz Cheney's and Adam Kinzinger in the House. So we're looking at an elected Republican Party that right now that has been thoroughly Trumpified. I think people know that, but also that there's not really a single representative you could identify as a never Trumper. So I think that that's the reality check, to recognize that to the extent that there is a never Trump movement, it does not exist among elected Republicans. So, I mean, that's part of we have to start there. But those people haven't all disappeared. I mean, you and I have not completely disappeared. And I understand that there's always been an appetite, a fantasy about a third party. I read what you wrote about that, people who have played around with that. And as much as I would like to say that there has to be a way for a third way to break out of this duopoly, the reality is that it's been tried before and it hasn't worked. So I think that the Never-Trumpers are going to splinter into a variety of groups, including those who will just simply continue to be political orphans. I hope people do not check out. Many of them will simply hope that the Democratic Party will be able to make a big enough tent and start winning elections. But I think it's a big question, and I don't have a definitive answer for you.
Well, so let me go back to a couple of things. So first is, you mentioned those in office. Okay, so yes, the elected part of the party is gone vis-a-vis Never Trump. But let's talk about the guys and gals like you and me who have been on the outside. Some of our friends and colleagues have, like Joe Walsh, have decided, okay, you know what? To your point, there's only two parties. I'm going to throw in with the Democrats. There are others who, like me, I tend to fight alongside Democrats. If I was elected to office, I would probably caucus with them at this moment. But what about the other folks who are like a Walsh, who says, yeah, I'm a Democrat now, but I'm still a conservative? But what if the Democratic Party never opens that door wide enough, and they say, okay, well, listen, I got to get back in the game. I've got to do something here, so I'll go back to the Republican Party. Is that something you could see happening?
Not right now. No, I'll be honest with you. I don't really see that much room in the Republican Party. But then again, I was reading your piece over the weekend, which had that dark thing like Donald Trump is dead. Imagine that we live in the post-Trump era. What could possibly happen? Even with Trump gone, it is hard to imagine. Principled never-Trumpers being elected. Now, again, maybe that will be different at the local level. I mean, maybe there will be, people who run and win for the legislatures. Maybe we will see governors who do that sort of thing. But I do think that at the moment, it's problematic. And a lot depends on which direction the Democratic Party goes. Now, having said that, I just want to remind people that when, the chips were down, when push came to shove, I endorsed Kamala Harris for president. I actually appeared with her. I did things with her, um, and tried to convince conservatives in the state of Wisconsin, my home state, that this was a legitimate choice. That it was so important to defeat Donald Trump that they needed to swallow their differences. I'm not sure that that was successful, but that's been my approach. That I will work with any Democrat that wants to work with us. And going forward, I hope that continues.
Well, and that's what I did too. I think the one thing that I found about myself, Charlie, and I'll take the blame solely for this, is that in 2020, that was very much the idea, and we were able to practice what we preached. For
Yes.
me, by 2024, I think my failing was that I had just become an adjunct of the Democratic Party. I was no
Yes.
longer someone who could speak to those never Trump Republicans, those disaffected Republicans, or even independent conservatives, if that makes sense. And that was for me the wake up call on November 6th. Now, look, I'm not particularly conservative, right? Like as my dad said when we were growing up, we were Trotskyite Republicans. But I think that was the other part, which was just being part of the hype, trying to convince those people who were unconvinced didn't do the job.
No, it didn't. It's interesting to hear you say that because, and I do think that maybe it's unfashionable in this particular area to engage in this kind of introspection because, of course, in MAGA world, nobody ever says that they're wrong ever about
Right.
anything. But I think that in terms of we're talking about never Trump. I think it was important to align with whoever could keep Donald Trump out of office. But then the problem becomes, okay, does that mean that you lose your ability to actually talk to conservative voters? And this is a point that I tried to make with limited success, which is that it's unreasonable to expect that millions of voters are going to abandon their principles if they were conservative, if they have socially conservative views. They're not all going to become Democrats. They're not all going to become progressive. So how do we talk to them? How do we relate to them? How do we say to them, we share your values. We do not look down on you. We have these shared values, which is why we should reject this. I think one of the problems of Never Trump, and I'm going to this is not a sweeping this is not a universal indictment,
Sure.
but that I think a lot of never Trumpers got drawn into simply catering, maybe it's fan service, catering to progressives. So we really are one of you. And as a result, began to I don't know, take positions that had the effect of alienating them from actual conservative voters. And I think that was part of the problem, that there was a certain audience capture, and that there was a willingness to, hey, we never Trumpers, we will be as woke as you will be. We're going to adopt all of these various views. And one of the things that I hope that people on both sides of this divide, this center right, center left, will understand is I think one of the roles that Never Trump should play, or what used to be known as Never Trump, is to constantly be pushing people may disagree, pushing the Democrats to the center, and pushing them to the center by recognizing that the majority makers are not going to be the people at the fringes, and that one of the things that we can do, and I think that we have not always done this effectively, is to say, okay, we know what your ideological id is, but we come from these folks who will actually determine who controls Congress and the Electoral College. And if you say X, Y, and Z, you will alienate them. If you want to communicate with them, if you want to persuade them, here are some things that I think that you need to keep in mind. So, and I know that there's a huge contingent among progressive Democrats who say, do not trust the Never Trumpers because they are conservatives. Well, yes, but that also means that if you're going to have a broad enough tent to win these elections, you ought to listen to us. When Never Trumpers become indistinguishable from progressives, then they lose, I think, their ability to play the role that I'm describing, if I'm being clear.
No, and again, I think that's exactly what happened to me, which was, and I think that happens. Look, you either leave home or you get tossed out of your house, and someone says, "Well, yeah, come on over here," and everybody, I mean, I don't know, Charlie.
I
Every time
understand.
we do an event, someone says, "Oh my God, in 2020, you kept me sane," right? Thank
Yeah.
you so much for what you've done. And look, that's very flattering, but it also becomes a little bit intoxicating, which is you like to hear that and you'd like to hear more of it. And if that means I have to do X to keep the dopamine rush flowing, well, okay, then I'll do that. But I think that what you said too is like, I'm not a Democrat. Maybe I could be one. But I think that understanding if you're telling me I have to follow every precept that you put out as a litmus test in order to join you or in order for you to accept me as an ally, that's a really hard argument to make.
No, it is, and I started thinking about this actually along the same lines you are. Look, I mean, I'm an MSNBC contributor. Let's be honest about this. That when we're talking to the MSNBC audience, we're not talking to swing voters. We're not talking to the voters who are going to determine who wins Michigan. I'm sorry. I mean, it's fan
Right.
service, and they do good work. But at a certain point, if Never Trump sort of drifts off into that sort of thing, then they've drifted off the ability to communicate again. And I understand that there's this fascination with sort of, the young, bright and shiny objects out there. And we get into this, some of the younger faces in the Democratic Party. But the reality is that, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here,
Mm.
the Democrats have a really strong base of centrist candidates who can and have won elections. And so, I mean, I think that we need to talk more about the Alyssa Slotkins, the Abigail Spanbergers, the others folks who will be the majority makers. Um, People can go into their blue sky bubble and share with one another how they really there's nothing that all the wonderful ideas that are coming from the Democratic Socialists of America. Trust me, none of those candidates could win a single district that will determine who controls Congress in 2026. And I do hope that Never Trumpers, at least, or the ex Never Trumpers, are able to make this case like I can I can convince people to vote for Abigail Spanberger or Alyssa Slotkin, who won in Michigan, or any of these Democrats who won in areas that voted for Trump. I can make that case. Do not require me to defend the character the candidates who could win in some deeply blue area. And the control of the Congress will not be decided in Berkeley, California, or in or in the Bronx. It's going to be decided in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, and the other swing states, Nevada and North Carolina. So I do think that we got away from some of our moderate roots. And I think that there was way too much star fucking going on some of the folks who decided that hey, we're never Trumpers. So suddenly we have this strange new respect. Let's all become celebrities and everything. And as a result of that, you suddenly drift off, and then you wonder, why are we not persuading swing voters anymore? Because they look at us and go, you have nothing in common with us.
Well, so let me ask a couple of questions. So
Mm.
let's take Michigan and Alyssa Slotkin. So I spent a
Yeah.
fair amount of time in Michigan
Yeah.
last year. Um, for whatever reason, I kept being sent to African American neighborhoods. And
Yeah.
Charlie, a lot of the people that I spoke to might have said that they were going to vote for Kamala Harris, but my gut tells me that they stayed home. And so I mean, and I spend a lot of time on the road now. I was just in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and
Yeah.
Southern Virginia, and I'll go and I'm going to go to North Carolina. I mean, I talk to everybody, and in the closer to quote unquote real America, the better for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of those folks stayed home. But then to your other point about, um, the young and bright, shiny objects, they do have a fair amount of energy and they are energizing a younger cohort of voters. So again, let's stay in Michigan. How does an Alyssa Slotkin or someone like that convince that black man I spoke to who said both parties are snakes and, one is the lesser of two evils, and convince those young, energized progressives, say in Ann Arbor, to both show up for an Alyssa Slotkin type?
Well, somehow she managed to do that because she won the election, right? So, here's the difference. I'm actually not a political consultant, so that's above my pay grade to do that. I think part of it is
I
to
think it's actually
make it very
below your
clear
pay
that
grade, to be
okay,
honest with you,
what
Charlie.
what people have to do is you have to be credible, you have to be authentic, and you have to make it clear that you do not represent some form of stale status quo. And as part of my tough love campaign this week, one of the problems that the Democrats have had, and I'm not breaking any news, is the Democratic establishment kept giving people candidates from previous centuries and previous decades, and they were stale and same old, and they did not seem either truthful or authentic. Now, I'm not trying to relitigate all of this.
Right.
Um, the Kamala Harris, problem is complicated because I actually think she ran a pretty good campaign. I'm not, by the way, I understand that's a deeply, unfashionable position to take here, and some of the responsibility has to be on the voters, which is that to think about millions of voters who decided that it wasn't important for them to turn out to vote against Donald Trump. I mean, they're getting a reality check right now. But I think this is the key, is to be able to communicate that it's not same old, same old. We're not going to lie to you. We're not going to spin with you, and we're not going to look down on you. And by the way, all of those are important because I do think there is kind of a sense of elitist contempt. You go into, and I know
Yes.
you've been to rural Wisconsin, rural, Pennsylvania, rural Minnesota, and they think that the elite progressives despise them and look down on them and call them names, and they're not totally wrong. So I think there's a certain amount of introspection that needs to go in. How do we have a conversation that shows respect? If I basically start a conversation with you and saying, yeah, I think you're an ignorant bigot and your mother's ugly. Would you like to hear my ideas about taxes? You see, it doesn't work that way. You're not gonna, I have some ideas about education reform, you know, you retromingent Nazi, woman hater. I mean, okay, so I know that I can be misunderstood here, but there has to be a sense that, okay, you respect me. We have some shared values that we can work off of. And I think that this is the one thing that we need to keep coming back to is like, I need to sit down with somebody. And if I go through the entire checklist of what's really popular in the MSNBC green room, I'm not going to persuade them. I'm not going to change their minds. So we have to find the common ground. And by the way, I think there's a moment for people who are still, and when I say conservative, I don't even know what conservative means anymore. But this is kind of a good moment to talk about the shared values that we have in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, how we believe in sort of a fundamental decency and treating people well, the rule of law, why, in fact, we have the system that we have, why government is limited, why we do not want kings. I mean, I actually think this debate about, that basically America since 1776 has said no to kings and no to tyrants. Now let's talk about what's happening is an interesting conversation because it's based in American values. And so among various things, I'm sorry to go on, one of the things I'm a little bit obsessed with is we need to, and you have already done this, I'm looking right over your shoulder here. Take back the fucking flag. It's
Mhm.
not their flag. They don't get to be the party of the American flag. They don't get to be the party of freedom and liberty. Fuck that. Those things belong to us. And so when you start to see people say, okay, first of all, you understand that we come from a point of loving America, loving American values, and being patriotic. Suddenly you establish that connection as opposed to, something very different.
Well,
What MAGA would like to portray you as.
right, and I would say too that the elitism piece, which I think for many voters, both base Democrats and Republicans, stretches from the progressives of New York City to the establishment of Washington D.C. And I think that not to put my political consultant hat on for too long, but there are far too many people trying to figure out how to move just enough, Jenga pieces together to build something, as opposed to saying, like, what does it matter? Like, what do we believe in? What is it that, as an organization, as a political party, like, what's our belief system? And I think that's the one thing I've seen up close, Charlie, is that What's surprising, as you can imagine, is when you work in Republican politics, you have a pretty good idea that your people are going to show up. Republican voters show up. What always fascinated me and still fascinates me to this day, and maybe fascinates the wrong word, is that every 2 years, Democrats have to rebuild their coalition. Every 2 years, they have to go begging to their voters to show up again. And there's a philosophical issue there. There's a strategic issue there. Frankly, there's a logistical issue there. 15 years ago, Democrats had a plus 13 registration advantage in electoral college states, key electoral college states. They're now -2. That's just neglect, right? That's not strategy. That's just somebody not willing or able to understand how to do the work or willing to do the work. And so there's a top to bottom issue. The other part I would say is, just to bring in some current events is if you are saying that, people in Texas got what they deserved, right, then you're doing it wrong. And I said this too when we saw the tornadoes in Arkansas, and we put out some stuff from the union about relief efforts after Trump denied Sarah Huckabee Sanders' FEMA request. You're doing it wrong because you're not only have you lost any, well, first of all, you don't have much of a moral backbone, but you've lost any moral high ground. And now you're not better. You're just a different version of what people already don't like.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I have not seen a lot of that, and you're completely right about this. But this is also a moment, and again, I think there ought to be a rethinking on the part of people on both ends of the political spectrum, including progressives who have believed that the government is the source of all good things, and therefore, the more powerful government is, the better we are. Well, you know what? A government that is really, massively powerful in the hands of a Donald Trump can do a lot of things to you. So this is a moment where we realize why government should be limited. On the other hand, what's happening in Texas is also a reminder that there are certain fundamental core responsibilities of government.
Yes.
Public safety, keeping the rule of law. We don't have a free market in America unless you have the rule of law, unless you have property rights. These are fundamental, but also nothing works if the government does not keep us safe. And I think that there should be a consensus there. So the notion that government is too big, I would like to have this conversation. How do you feel today about the cuts with the National Weather Service? I feel comfortable having that conversation, even with some people in deep MAGA world, but certainly with swing voters. Do you think that those are right cuts? And I think this is the real vulnerability now, because now we have to talk about what our values and our priorities are. Is it more important to cut taxes for millionaires and billionaires than to have early warning systems that will protect people from flash floods? That's a discussion that I think we can have. And that's a discussion that I think that people can then recalibrate their their view of the role of government.
Well, let me go to the bill that passed last week for a second, because over the holiday weekend, Charlie, I was able to see a lot of folks that I hadn't seen in a while, meet some people. Most of them look like you and me, not surprisingly. And it was interesting that these are guys who mostly voted for Trump, but they're not Trump fans. Now, I live in Utah, so take it for what it's worth. But it was interesting to see two guys that I've known for a while at a 4th of July barbecue going through how they would solve the debt and deficit. One's a guy in a software company, the other guy's a finance guy. But what they came up with was higher taxes, expand, raise the retirement age on Social Security and Medicare, expand the Medicare tax above $100,000, and then some cuts to things that probably need to be cut. And I'm like, these are two guys standing in someone's backyard, right? Like they could figure it out. And then 2 nights ago, I was at another friend's home, and he's like, I can't believe they did that. I can't believe they did that. I mean, they are going to bankrupt us. I have kids, you have kids, we have kids to worry about. He's like, in 10 years, this is going to be unsustainable. And they pretend like they're doing us a favor. Again, these are not liberal guys. These are not progressive guys. These are guys who understand from an economic perspective, in particular, how the world works. And they're beside themselves. They are gettable, Charlie. They are gettable.
I totally agree. And the reality is that clearly fiscal conservatism is dead within the Republican Party, at least in Congress, but it's not dead out there in the world where people have a certain level of common sense. And from my point of view, from being in Wisconsin, I cannot tell you the number of conversations I had about the looming debt crisis and how we have to get control of the deficit. And here you have Republicans voting lockstep for this massive, massive intergenerational transfer of wealth. This is one of the greatest intergenerational transfers of wealth in history from our kids
Right.
to us. So yes, they are. Now, look, can I? And by the way, I totally agree, but I want to take a slightly contrarian point of view here.
Sure.
I hope that people, and I'm really kind of a little obsessed with warning people about falling into a bubble because you and I have seen the consequences of a right wing bubble. There's also a liberal bubble.
Mhm.
I think this is a huge loser for Republicans. I think this is a disaster for Republicans. I want to make that very clear. On the other hand, do not underestimate Donald Trump's ability to sell some of the bright, shiny objects.
Sure.
And I think that people ought to be prepared that, okay, we all know who the losers are in this bill. We know how horrible it is. But there are winners in this bill. And Donald Trump has proven that he will lie about what's in this bill. The fact that he's had the Social Security Administration send out letters to every senior saying that somehow some great thing's going to happen. It was totally bullshit. But it's a warning. There are these bright, shiny objects, and he's going to talk about, the no taxes on tips, the no taxes on overtime. I'm helping the working class. There are things that they will do. So one of the things, and I'm kind of going back to a point you made, I think that the right has figured out that there is no election cycle, that it's permanent campaign all the time.
Correct.
If people are waiting for the midterm elections, if Democrats are waiting, it's a huge mistake. They need to be up right now defining this because now the race is on. Are you going to define this as, look at all these goodies I did for America, or are you going to talk about what's actually in this for the country? And I think the Republicans are going to lose, but let's not get cocky about it because we are having this conversation now because we've underestimated Trump and the MAGA world and their ability to spin shit into gold. And so I hope that that people understand, these things do not sell themselves. They do not define themselves. And the campaign does not begin next fall. It begins right now.
Well, they are political alchemists. I think you're right. And this is one thing. So let's just,
Yeah.
for argument's sake, Charlie, let's say that on a generic congressional ballot, Democrats are up 2.
Yeah.
For me, in this moment, based on what you're talking about, which is a leader who will say and do anything, a party that will say and do anything, a very smart group of people who understood how to engineer the cuts to things like Medicare and Medicaid such that they don't take place until after a midterm election. The fact that they're already saying, well, Democrats are saying, Democrats voted against a tax cut for you, right? Like they'll do and say these things, and they'll do it and say it 24/7, which means they have the permanent campaign, and they have had it since you were on the radio, since Rush was on the radio, right? And that is one thing that the left has not been able to understand, figure out, fund, or ultimately really bring to fruition. The other part too is that it's not enough, as we saw last year, to just be anti-Trump. You also have to say, and when we take power, or when we take the House back, or when we take legislative seats back, here is our agenda for the future. Because it's not enough to just say I'm anti-Trump, because it's too many people, it just bounces off of them now.
Okay, now this is in your wheelhouse, not mine, but I sense that one of the dangers here is that the Democrats are going to do the whiteboard. They're going to do the look what the deficit. This is why it's bad for the country. And what Trump is going to do is he's going to do the retail. Look what I'm giving to you. You can go out and buy your big ass truck, and you can now deduct the cost of the interest from your big ass truck. That's tangible. If you work overtime, you will pay no taxes on it. So he will say, this is what I'm giving to you, while the Democrats are talking about public policy. At some point, the Democrats have to say, this is why it is in your interest. This is why you are better off if you vote for us. Donald Trump has moved up. What Donald Trump is doing has nothing to do with traditional Republican conservatism. It's almost like third world banana republic. I'm going to give this to you and this to you, and
Right.
he's picking them up. And that's what he's going to be talking about. And the problem with the midterms is because there's sunsets on all of these goodies that he's handed out. The Republicans are going to run saying the Democrats are going to take away all these goodies. So they're going to turn it around. The Democrats are going to tax your overtime. The Democrats are going to tax your tips. The Democrats are going to tax your Social Security. I mean, you see what I'm going here. So
Yeah, sure.
this is why let's not be cocky about this. Let's not simply assume that because talking heads on MSNBC, and yes, I am looking in the mirror, are all telling each other how awful this is and everything, that somehow that's going to be a difference. If they're spending $100 million talking about Democrats are going to raise your taxes, that's a problem. Also, at the risk of pissing everybody off, the biggest gift that's been given to Donald Trump are all the Democrats gathering around the Democratic Socialist candidate for mayor in New York, who, by the way, Democratic Socialists of America are not Scandinavian style Democratic Socialists. This is not Denmark. This guy has so much baggage, and I think there's a little bit of media malpractice because once he gets elected, wait till you see the Oppo dump. Now, it's totally unfair, but he's going to nationalize that. And every Democrat that endorses him or goes, these socialist ideas aren't that bad, it's like, gimme for the Republicans. So I'm guessing that will play an outsized role in the midterm elections as well.
Well, again, this is
Go ahead
this
and
is also
cancel me now. I get it. I get it.
this is also part of a problem for a party in the wilderness, right?
Yeah.
Do we love Mamdani? Do we love Gavin Newsom? Do we love Alyssa Slaw? We love everybody, right? Like it's like speed dating, right? They'll take anybody for 60 seconds if they make them feel good. The problem is that there's nobody there. And let me just say this to the risk of being canceled myself is like the James Carville just roll over and play dead and let the house
Yeah.
burn down and everybody will come and thank us for it is also just a terrible strategy. As I have said repeatedly, at some point, guys, you actually have to pretend like you want to win, right?
Okay,
And
so right. So I mean, so in your comment section here, somebody says, you guys are all freaked out about I'm sorry, I apologize. Mamdani. Like, what is his baggage? Well, this is the thing is if you live in a bubble, you don't know the baggage. You don't know we will seize the means of production. The support for Anwar al-Awlaki, one of the Al-Qaeda guys. There is so much there. Trust me, the Republicans have it all. It's all out there. So at some point, take a deep breath and go, simply because Trump is attacking the guy does not mean you have a moral obligation to defend it. He actually, this is one of his tactics. It's kind of a rope-a-dope. I attack someone and I vilify him. And so everyone feels the need to defend it. Again, here's another thing, and I'm sorry to give a homework assignment. Go and actually look up the platform of the Democratic Socialists of America. And trust me, I know I got a lot of shit from this. It's like, it's not socialist, it's Democratic Socialist. Fine. Go look at their platform, and then you tell me how that's going to work. Pulling out of NATO, nationalizing the banks, all of these things that frankly are not mainstream. So don't give me shit about like, why are you guys freaked out? What is his baggage? I know nothing about his baggage. Trust me, the Republicans know the baggage, and they're going to dump it on Democrats if they're not prepared for it.
well, I did see one person, and I'll say this about Mamdani, and I will say this, that there were two things that did make me happy about his winning the primary, Charlie. One is that Andrew Cuomo lost. And
Yes, absolutely.
the second is that the Democratic establishment went nuts. So I do appreciate that because I'm not making a political argument. I'm not making a philosophical argument on the tenets of democratic socialism. I'm making an argument that there were people who were willing to go there because at least it was something he said he was going to do whether you agree with it or not. And people said, see, at least he has something he would like to do that makes sense. And I like him and I can embody him as someone who is a messenger, as opposed to a cranky old man who was already tossed out of office, who's sitting in the carpenter's hall somewhere being told by billionaires, just hang tight, we'll take care of you.
Well,
Right. Like I could see why there was a bit of a groundswell for him.
oh yeah, but again, don't then nationally we should not misread this. This was not necessarily a groundswell for far left progressive politics, the kind that, by the way, has been disastrous in the mayor's office in places like Chicago. It's not because they were endorsing the ideology; it was a rejection of the same old, same old. If the Democrats keep giving us the same old, or somebody as badly damaged as Andrew Cuomo, I mean, who thought that Andrew Cuomo was a good idea? Seriously. And
Right.
so, in many ways, the responsibility for this rests on the Democratic establishment. The folks who said, yes, ignore the evidence of your eyes about Andrew Cuomo being a total sleazebag. Many of them, the same guys who said, ignore the evidence of your eyes that Joe Biden is up for another term. So you kind of wonder why people go, we're not listening to you. We're going to go for anyone who is exciting and young and dynamic. Okay, so exciting, young, dynamic, good. Far left politics, and I mean far left politics. That's not what they did. And also, from the point of view of governance, you want the biggest cities in America to be governed well. And this is a problem. If you have places like Chicago that are not governed well, Los Angeles that is not governed well, or New York that is not governed well, if they are in fact, if we do have a defund the police guy back in office, that is not going to help us win elections nationally. So I guess the question is, what is the prime directive? Is the prime directive to stop Donald Trump and all of his works? Or is the prime directive to scratch your ideological id? I mean, you have to decide. I mean, do you really want to win, or do you not want to win?
Well, I think for me, because maybe I'm still the last idealist out here, is that I think that there are ways to do both, but you have to do two things. One, logistically walk and chew gum. And secondly, you have to be able to hold two thoughts in your head. That a
Yeah,
guy like Mamdani could win in a place like New York City. He's not going to win in East Texas. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's not a thing wrong with that. A conservative Democrat used to get elected everywhere, right? The problem is, Charlie, as I see
right.
it, is we don't have Democrats in too many places, right, that aren't even running. And that's one thing that we've talked about a lot, is that in 2024, 71% of races ran unopposed in this country from top to bottom. In 3/4 of those, it was the Democrats who didn't put somebody up, right?
That's right.
If it's a red district, you got to show up. Can't let somebody
Well,
just run roughshod.
this is a great point because it is possible. I mean, who is the most popular governor in America, the Democratic governor in America right now? Andy Beshear from
Right.
Kentucky. There's a Democratic governor from Kentucky. And if people are listening to this going, I don't know anything about this guy, ask yourself, why do you not know about the most successful Democrat in a Republic? What does it take to win in these elections? Because you need a lot more Andy Beshears and, frankly, fewer other folks.
Well, all right. Well, Charlie, first and foremost, thank you for joining me. Before we let you go, what is your latest post about, and where can everybody find To the Contrary?
Well, to the contrary, on Substack, thank you very much for mentioning it. Over the weekend, I did an interview with Judge Michael Ludig, and we walked through the fundamental American values embodied in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It was a very, very powerful interview. And then, of course, today I have a thing about the Donald Trump's mega spending bill and some of the fails that were involved there. Because, I mean, I do think it's going to be a disaster for Republicans, but I also think that this is the moment for a little bit of tough love. The worst thing that could happen is for people to get high on the hopium and fall into bubbles where you don't see what's coming. So that's kind of the way I'm reacting to the dilemma that you posed before, is like, what role can we play? I know that people don't always want to hear it, but sometimes if you're going to not repeat the failures of the past, you need to acknowledge them and think it through what happened. I'm sorry.
Well,
Long
and
answer.
not and not fight the wars of the past because they're over. All right, gang. I have a piece up today about Elon's hopium of a third party. I have spent a lot of time doing this in my career, and I can promise you, it is not an easy thing, and the system is set up specifically to avoid it. Please go over to the home front and sign up there. Charlie Sykes, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. Anytime, Reed.
And everybody else, we'll see you next time.